Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jill, aka GE White, and I like stories. I hope you like stories because that's what we discuss here. So for those of you who have seen my face, it's probably been a while since you've seen my face, and I apologize for that. So yeah, my last video was back in May, which is it's pretty bad. I do have a bit of an excuse. So if you can't tell, I have moved. Granted, I haven't moved houses. I've just moved rooms. But I kind of went overboard with like redecorating. I repainted the place. I moved all my stuff in. I've been like ordering art prints and doing all this other stuff. I got really involved in it. I guess it must be like, the pandemic talking and just being like, okay, if I'm stuck inside, I'm gonna beautify my space. So that's what happened. And so, yeah, I kind of got a bit sidetracked between that and my book, which granted was supposed to be coming out in the summer, and then later it was going to be October. It's already October, so obviously that's not happening. I do hope it will be coming out either like in December of this year or early 2020. I still need to talk to my publishers about what's going on, but I will let you guys know when I have an answer. So last time you heard from me, I was talking about my to be read list, which was basically the Percy Jackson series, if you can't tell. And I was really excited because I write Greek mythology as well, and it kind of seemed disingenuous that I hadn't read the Percy Jackson series, at least out of like Rick Riordan's like 3 sets of 5 books in his like Olympian trilogy, or not trilogy, but you know what I mean. It's 15 novels, but it's like 5, 5, and 5. So like 3 quintologies, quintessences, something to that nature. Uh, anyway, so I've only read like obviously the Percy Jackson, which is the first quintology of his series, but I definitely needed it just to kind of give myself a perspective of what to expect. There's a lot to talk about. Originally, I was going to do it book by book, but I got distracted, and obviously that didn't end up happening. So I will be reviewing the series as a whole. It seems like a lot, but I'm gonna try and keep it short and to the point. I made notes because I actually have already filmed this once, and actually probably some other takes that didn't make it at all, but I rambled a lot, so I decided if I make notes, I can maybe be a bit more concise and not have like a half-hour talk of me hemming and hawing about Percy Jackson. Anyway, so first off, I'm just going to give a general overview. I will try to keep it spoiler-free as much as I can. I will give any warnings if I decide I'm going to reveal a spoiler. But I will say that there probably will be heavier spoilers for the first book just because it establishes a lot of the characters in like their actual their roles in the series overall, and some of those are reveals, if you will. So yeah, I also have a bit of a stuffy nose. I apologize. It's not the not the virus. It's just it's the changing of the seasons. So as I might be I guess checking in with my notes. So excuse me while I do it. So my overall impression, overall, like, did I like this? This is a good series. I will say yes. I found it, it was entertaining, and I do love Greek mythology so much that it was just so great to see all these different stories come to life through, Percy and his friends and their adventures. And like I will say this, I guess my one kind of gripe, like an overall gripe, is that I wish I had read this when I was younger. Like, it is very much a middle grade series. The language is, semi-simplistic, but that's not a bad thing. It definitely kept me turning the pages. The series as a whole, it is fast paced. There is always something happening in every single chapter. So, it's great for young readers that way because you just have to know what happens, the next chapter, the next chapter, the next chapter. There's always something happening, which is great. Especially for people who, may not have like the kind of attention span that you're, like a younger person might have. But for me, I kind of like to have a bit more time to breathe, a bit more, introspection, that kind of stuff. And I kind of felt this was missing in this because it is very much an adventure series. But that's just a personal taste. I would still definitely recommend it. As I said, I just wish I had read it like when I read the Harry Potter series back in like, high school or younger, you know? So, but overall, Rick Riordan has introduced a whole generation to Greek mythology, which I will always be grateful for because Greek mythology is awesome. Yes. So now I'm going to get into a bit more of the nitty gritty of like things I liked and versus things that I felt could need work or just didn't ring quite with me. So first off, things I liked. So I am actually really impressed with Riordan's versions of his female characters. Almost all of them. There is like one main exception, which I will get into later. But like of his main characters that are female, Annabeth, Thalia, and he's got several others, and of course I'm blanking on the names at the moment. But Clarice, they are really quite interesting, and they're probably the most fleshed out of his characters, even including Percy, who I feel is like Percy. He's not a bad character at all. He's a protagonist, and being a YA protagonist, like not even a YA, a middle grade protagonist. He's a little bit of a semi-blank slate. We have a general idea of his personality, but it's mostly the plot is kind of what drives him, and not so much that he drives the plot half the time. And that's not a bad thing. Once again, I'm sorry, I keep on getting hair in my mouth. That let me just tuck this behind your, that'll probably help it. So, but I do like Annabeth, and Thalia, I totally get where they're coming from. Same with like Clarice. Their motives and their behaviors are very well illustrated, and I know why they behave the way that they do. And they're all very smart and strong and individual young women. And though, like later, you have characters like Annabeth and Rachel, a little bit of a spoiler, kind of falling into the trap of, possibly being romantic rivals. It's not something that's dwelled upon, and I mean, because they are teenagers, I'm willing to kind of like let it slide. Plus, there are so many books out there that deal with like, love triangles of like the gender swapped variety, so, all's fair in love and war kind of thing. So I also really love that there was several like even though like yeah, you're introducing Greek mythology in the sense of, oh, here's a monster that Percy and his friends have to deal with. Okay, that's one thing, but there's actual homages in general to I guess like the Greek stories in like as a whole. Namely, I will say for both Sea of Monsters and Battle of the Labyrinth, we get a lot of like with obviously Sea of Monsters is very much an homage to the Odyssey. A lot of the things that Percy and his friends encounter are creatures and experiences that Odysseus and his crew dealt with during that particular story. And I really do love it, and I think it will once again spark interest in a younger audience to check out those stories. And same with Battle of the Labyrinth. While it was very original, very imaginative, we still get like this backstory of Daedalus and Icarus and all this cool stuff that's going on there. So very interesting, very interesting. So I also love like the themes of family, especially in the vein of parental responsibility. Uh, it's so great that Riordan, he has kept the Greek gods very petty, and so with that being said, like they're going to be making a lot of mistakes, and obviously that actually fuels the fire for several of the villains, which is another high point of the series. The villains, I mean, our main villain, Kronos, he's kind of a bit of a generic bad guy. He's, tried to take over once, was struck down, has been wallowing in Tartarus this time, and, is making his comeback. He's kind of a bit of, like, almost this eldritch horror in the sense that he is, a bit unfathomable and, as I said, kind of just a generic evil, evil for generally for revenge. And like that's not a bad thing. And this is where I might get into a bit of spoilery, so prepare yourselves, especially for, I think this is a spoiler for book 3 and 4-ish. I can't remember exactly where this happens, but yeah. So Luke, who is a son of Hermes, is revealed in the first book to have kind of to be an agent of Kronos, and later on becomes host to him. And I thought that was a kind of a neat way of bringing forth this idea of a villain to have this almost avatar like relationship with Luke and Kronos, and uh, especially getting into Luke's backstory and finding out, how he grew up, all these things of how his, like, both his mother and father have treated him, the choices that they made, and how they have also kind of affected Luke in in the end. Luke very much is the hero of his own story, and I feel that is the key to making a good villain. So I really appreciated that. And, you also kind of got not just Luke, but people like Ethan, like Nakamura, who we got another kind of taste of, these demigod children who are kind of cast to the wind and left to fend for themselves. And it's very interesting. Plus, it also touched into the idea of the minor gods, who I find a lot more interesting than some of like the so-called like Olympian gods. Some of them I'm just like, don't care, move on. I'm more interested. Like Nemesis, so interesting. I find those characters very interesting. So I'm so glad that they did that. So what needs work in this series? What kind of didn't meet my expectations or meet the hype? So while I did love the female characters, and as I said, they were very well, they were very much like, pretty well developed. I knew, as I said, I knew their goals, um, their motivations for stuff, all that kind of stuff. Their actions always made sense to me. Percy was kind of a bit underdeveloped, as I said, but I think that's a staple of a protagonist. Kind of has to be the audience surrogate on some level. So, and as much as I love a character like Harry, I still don't know everything about him. I mean, he's kind of a stereotypical like jock in the sense of like, oh, he likes Quidditch and he doesn't like doing schoolwork, but like, you don't really get a huge amount of introspection into him as much as you might want, like other than like a few times, especially in I think it's Order of the Phoenix, where we get to have a bit more of his introspection, but people just kind of like waved it off as being him being moody. But we're not here to talk about Harry Potter, so I will stop there. I kind of also felt bad for, like, you originally thought that the trio was going to be, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover kind of constantly gets pushed to the side, and with his own quest to find Pan and save the wild and all that kind of stuff, very honorable things to do, but I didn't really care as much about his quest as anything else was going on. And as I said, he was kind of sidelined a lot of the time, whether it was, because he was a character that needed saving or was just off doing his own thing. But his absence did make it possible for us to have other characters like Tyson and Thalia and Nico and all these other people, make their debut, and I did appreciate that. So that was cool. As I said, you have a bigger cast of characters, and therefore not everybody gets as much quote unquote screen time or page time, I guess. So that's a little bit disappointing. So the other things that I needed to address, there was two things. So I had mentioned earlier that I really loved almost all the female characters except for one, and that one was the portrayal of the goddess Artemis. Artemis is like my favorite of the Olympian gods. I like when I went to Greece, I got a little statue of her, and she's like, she's my between her and Athena, they are my faves. They are like absolutely my faves. And when they introduced Artemis and they had it be that she always presents herself as like a young girl, it kind of, I don't know, there's something about it that bothered me, and I'll tell you why. They very much put forth this idea of Artemis as a virgin goddess, and the idea that she is, a protector of young women and all this kind of stuff. And because she, unlike most of the other gods, she has no demigod children. She has her hunters, who are people that she selects, namely young women. Like, there are no men among her hunters that are, basically she grants them immortality. She makes them basically part of her cadre. And that's really cool, but at the same time, it puts a lot of I guess, emphasis on the idea of these girls being, young and untouched, if you will. And there's something about that I really, I don't know, I kind of find a bit, I don't know if it's problematic or not. And maybe it's because, like, I'm very well aware of people who are, part of the ace community or demisexual and are full grown adults and, would technically fall into that thing, and the idea that, this purity is only reserved for the young and that kind of idea. I do think that, like, Artemis is very much like an ace icon, and to have it be that she is a child because of that, it just, I don't know, there's something kind of weird about that, and it's almost like kind of infantilizing of this character. So I wasn't a big fan of that. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of, like, these badass girls taking out stuff, but a little disappointed that, they could never grow up or anything like that because it was considered, almost taboo. It's very Peter Pan-esque, but not in a way I enjoy. So that was my one real gripe with, like, the female representation. The other thing, actually, that's not 100% true, because apparently my next point is about the hand waving of some concepts that are very interesting but never get explained. I mean, they have the prophecies, and the prophecies, they work out actually pretty well. If you go back and reread them, things definitely do fall into into place. And even though there's a subversion of some of these prophecies into a way that you weren't expecting, I still appreciate that. I always love it when an author will, mention something at the beginning and then have it pay off later down the road. But as I said, with this particular thing I'm about to bring up is the relationships within, among the demigods, because we do kind of acknowledge that, technically, the main pairing, and this is a bit of a spoiler, main pairing is meant to be Percy and Annabeth. The problem is that technically they are related. With Percy being the son of Poseidon and Annabeth being the daughter of Athena, technically Annabeth is his cousin once removed, right? Because Athena is Poseidon's niece, and so her child would be Percy's cousin once removed, because Athena would be his cousin, and then her kid is her cousin once removed, as far as I understand it. So, I mean, there's a little bit of squickiness there, if, like, because of, like, most people are not really, like, into, the familial relationships that way. But they kind of hand wave it basically by saying, like, well, gods don't really have DNA the way that we do, and it's very much kind of like, it's not a big deal. So that's not really explained, but what really kind of irritated me, because I was like, what do you mean by this? And even Percy as a character asked what she meant by this, and by she I mean Annabeth. Annabeth mentioned that, her mother, Athena, is still a virgin goddess, and all of her children are quote unquote brain children. And this is obviously a throwback to the idea of Athena's creation in the myth, which is basically her mother, Metis, was pregnant with her and was going to give birth, and there was a prophecy that Zeus heard that Metis' child would eventually overthrow him and all this kind of stuff. He couldn't have that, so he swallows Metis whole, and then later Athena kind of bursts from his cranium at some point, fully formed, and therefore it's kind of like this miraculous, like, virgin birth. But it's this, as I said, the idea of a brain child, someone who literally comes out of your brain, but they don't really explain that. I'm very confused, as in, like, okay, so is she just a thought? Is she a figment of, like, Athena's imagination made whole? Is it kind of like a homunculus? There's a lot of questions that I have about Annabeth, and, like, I think it's very interesting, but I never get anything else, explained. I apologize if you hear some, like, knocking. I think somebody's doing some work outside next door. So yeah, that was kind of, I was a bit underwhelming with that, the bit of the hand waving. I also did really enjoy. I meant to say, like, most of the characterization of the gods I felt was very interesting, but I don't know. Like I think Persephone kind of got a bit of a rough shake of it. I always kind of saw her as a bit more badass than how they made her. They made her and her mother more just, I don't know, kind of naggy, and I wasn't here for that. I was very interested in the character of Nico, and I think he might be in the other series, so I might have to check that out because I thought he was an interesting character. So yeah, those are my general thoughts to the series overall. My final thing is this particular collection I got. I love how the covers all kind of like they meld together to make one image. If you, I don't know if you can see that from here, but the images actually do like overlap. There's like a bit of the labyrinth on this book, which melds into here, which but then there's also the wing of Blackjack, which is one of the Pegasuses, all that kind of stuff. Really cool. My only issue with it, and I don't know if I have it around here, is it came in a cardboard collection where it could hold all the books together. But after reading it, all the books have expanded and they no longer fit into this I guess cardboard like sheath to hold all of them. So they're just gonna have to go in individually. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Percy Jackson. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on like what you thought about the books, like which one was your favorite. I'm having issues with like choosing a favorite right now. I think like Sea of Monsters is very interesting. I also like the last one was actually pretty good too. Like probably my least favorite would actually be the first one. The first one didn't catch my interest as much as the rest of them did. Also, the Titan's Curse, while it had some interesting points here and there, it's one of the weaker ones in my opinion. So yeah, like 2, 4, and 5 were the best, I think, of the series, while the other two were kind of, they're fine, they're just not my faves. So that being said, I also decided instead of making a separate video, I would also just reveal what I'm reading for the month of October. I was actually hoping to get my hands on Cemetery Boys, which of course I can't remember who wrote it at this point. I'll put up a picture maybe at some point around here somewhere. But unfortunately, all the bookstores near me, they're either sold out. Even Amazon was like conspicuously empty of like, I like to have like a hardcover book. And they're also kind of expensive and like money's a little, short here and there. So I ended up actually deciding I was going to read this book, which is called How to Catch a Bogle. Now, once again, it's another middle grade book, so I don't know if I'm going to like it or not, but the reason I'm choosing it is because, the word Bogle it basically refers to a creature in Irish mythology, similar to a boogeyman or a boggart in Harry Potter. It's sometimes a shapeshifter, sometimes it's like just a creepy, a being. Anyway, the reason why I chose this is that this book was actually picked up by my mother, and she picked it up for my nephew. He never got around to reading it, unfortunately. And the reason she picked it up, I know it's kind of reflecting on the light, is because the word Bogle actually it's a name that is prevalent in my mother's side of the family. And so she kind of got it as a bit of a whim and to kind of a nod to our Irish heritage. I mean, I'm Canadian full and through, like through and through, but my ancestors have links in Ireland, and I thought, okay, it's kind of a spooky book. I mean, granted, it's meant for younger readers, but it should be fun. It's already like halfway through October, so it's not a very long book. There is a series. There are 2 other books, and we do actually have them. But I'm just going to do the one just because I've been fairly busy with other things. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this. If you guys have read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, no spoilers, obviously, but I'm curious because it should be interesting. I'll quickly read the back, just so you guys can get an idea of what it's about. So, in the mean streets of Victorian London, orphans must do the most dangerous and unsavory jobs just to survive, which is why Bertie considers herself lucky to be apprenticed to Alfred the Bogler, a man who traps and kills monsters for a living. It's a far better life than mudlarking for flotsam in the stinky Thames, or toshing things from the even stinkier sewers. Okay, might take a while to actually get used to this reading. Sure, Birdie's job is dangerous, but she's fast and light on her feet, and she can sing like a bird she's named for, so no Bogle is ever going to catch her. Or so Birdie thinks, until the orphans of London start to disappear. Oh, okay. All right. Kind of almost reminds me of like his Dark Materials, like, a character who's dealing with like, missing children and that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully it'll be really good, and I'll tell you my thoughts on it come November. Uh, but yeah, thanks again for watching, and please do like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content, and please do comment below. I want to hear your thoughts, and we can have a conversation about Percy Jackson or stories or whatever. All right, guys, hope you're being safe out there, and have a good October. Okay, bye.